The Edmonton Oilers picked up a 4-2 win Saturday night on the second half of a back-to-back against the Kraken, and we learned a few things about their lineup on today's edition of Locked On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to this Monday afternoon edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can enjoy the NFL playoffs with a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet and get started with $200 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, lineup juggling, Draisaitl superstardom, the goaltending tandem, and what it all means about the direction of the team. So, at the start, anytime you're playing on the second half of a back-to-back and you got to travel for the second game, you are going to feel it. And I think it is very much taken for granted how much of a grind the NHL regular season is. I know the perception among sports fans is that the NFL is the most unforgiving, and football is a brutal and taxing and barbaric at times sport rooted in a lot of sociological and cultural ties to a bygone era of violence in sports. But even though the hockey players aren't as violent as they are in the NFL, that feeling of having another person explode through you, put a shoulder through your chest, and just knock you on your butt, that is not something the average person understands what that feels like. And to get up for the second half of a back-to-back consistently the way the Oilers have, I think that says a lot about both their talent and it says a lot about their character, because when you are on the second half of a back-to-back and you are physically compromised and you don't have the full reprise of an off day to kind of build yourself back up, you know, we talk about how energy we use the metaphor of like a gas tank when we're talking about energy. And as the season goes along, that gas tank refills a little bit less every single time. You know, you're never going to feel as good in the middle or in early January as you are the first week of September when you're just starting to ramp up your hockey activities. That accumulation, that grind really does weigh on you. And it's an environment in game conditions where it's easy to fall on bad habits because you're tired, to say, well, we have enough talent. We just got to hang around in this game. And then when the game's in the balance, we'll find a way to pull away. And the Oilers do have a ton of talent. And a lot of nights, the Oilers can get by waiting for one of their superstars to make a play outside of structure, to bend the game to their will. And that's really one of the traits that separates the great players from everyone else, is that when the game is hanging in the balance, someone like Leon, someone like Connor, and at times someone like Evan Bouchard can just put their head down and find a way. And that type of alpha play, if you will, that type of lead the way mentality, it's very hard to do in a sport like hockey. It's not like basketball where you can just attack the rim over and over and over again. And if you're physically strong enough, you can draw fouls and you can keep getting that ball to go in the basket. It's not like football where when a quarterback's hyper-focused, locked in, they know where they need to go with the ball right away, or a hitter where if you're seeing the ball out of the pitcher's hand really well, you are teed up to it. It doesn't really work like that in hockey because the game state is so fluid. It's really challenging to put your head down and kind of swing the game on your own. And that's what makes what Draisaitl does, what McDavid does, all the more remarkable, is that not only is it really hard to do, it's that they do it consistently. And this is the first time, and I wanted to cite this stat on the show today because I found it amazing. This is the first time since Connor McDavid was drafted that the Oilers have won 2 games in a row without him recording a point in either game. We're talking 10 years, 9 seasons, 10 years. He was drafted June of 2015, played his first regular season game in October of 2015. We're in 2025 now, and that's the first time that's happened in a very, 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 very long time. And I think the simple matter of the fact is the Oilers are trying to figure out what their lineup is going to look like. And we've talked about that a lot over the last few weeks on Locked On Oilers, the idea of sorting out who plays with who and then what to do with the rest. And I'm pretty sure that Zach Hyman's going to end up back with Connor McDavid after moonlighting in the bottom 6. And there are a couple of theories floating around out there. Jason Strudwick on the Sportsnet broadcast theorized that this is Chris Knobloch's way of keeping everybody fresh, that if we're constantly changing who's playing with who, nobody can get complacent because you have to work harder when you're playing with people you're unfamiliar with because you have to accept their game for where it's at. You have to make concessions in your own game. And that, in theory, is both A, going to make you less selfish as a player, and B, it's going to put you in a better position to make plays because you're not going to be doing outside of structure plays. You're going to fall back on what you're supposed to be doing. So that way you're not throwing your new line mates for a loop. And I'm pretty confident that McDavid will get back with Hyman and Podkolzin is staying with Draisaitl. As much as we would all like to see Jeff Skinner really get it going, barring injury, I don't think there's a world where you're going to see Podkolzin come off of Leon's line just because the synergy they have. You know, you got another Podkolzin goal. He's up to 4 on the year. I know that doesn't sound like an awful lot, but with the season he's having, he doesn't need to score a whole lot. And then Draisaitl had the put away goal, the empty netter, late in the third on Saturday night. And when you can build that much of your game out of just a handful of guys and you are continuing to rack up wins, you are continuing to find ways to put yourself in a position to be successful where it's not just Connor, it's not just Leon, it's not just Evan Bouchard, it's not just the power play, it's not just the penalty kill. When you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 prongs to a path to success, you only need 3 or 4 of those 5 to win most nights. And if you can have 3 or 4 of those prongs get tripped every single game, that tells me you're a really good hockey team. And look, Seattle's not a very good hockey team. They try very hard. They play a cycle, grinded out style. And it was hard for the Oilers to find that put away goal. Make no mistake about it. That was a real challenge. But the Oilers were able to respond to that challenge. And that's something to feel good about. We're going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the goaltending tandem. So be sure to stick around on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. The NFL playoffs kick off 4:30 Saturday afternoon. Justin Herbert and the Chargers heading to Houston to take on C.J. Stroud and the Texans, where the Chargers are 2.5-point road favorites. The best game of the weekend, though, is probably Sunday afternoon, where the Green Bay Packers are going to head to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, where the Eagles are 4.5-point favorites. And yes, super wild card weekend Monday. The Vikings heading to LA to take on the Rams, where the Vikings are 1.5-point favorites. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers, and to everybody who had asked or reached out and said, I'm good to go now. I had a few people, listeners of the show, reach out over the last few days asking how I was doing because I'd brought up on the show I wasn't feeling well. We're good to go. I ran before recording today. I plan to lift later. So we're back up to, I wouldn't say 100% capacity, but pretty close. We're pretty much back where we need to be doing stellar content on a consistent basis, which is the end goal. Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to ask you to listen to the show, to put it in your immediate diet. I have to make it worthwhile for you. So with that in mind, one of the things I love talking about when it comes to hockey and sports in general is roster composition, because how you choose to put together your roster, it tells me a lot about what you value and what you think about the sport. When you spend X amount of dollars on a certain position group, that tells me what you think about that position group. And in some cases, your hand is forced, where you have pre-existing commitments prior to when you came on board, and what those commitments said about your predecessor, you sometimes are going to need to compensate or overcompensate for that. And one of the areas where the Oilers really tell you what they think about a position group is goaltending in terms of how they spend. They are one of the 5 cheapest teams when it comes to what they spend on goaltending. And what that typically means is you're going to get more volatility. One of the consistencies in professional sports is the more you pay for something, there's an assumption that you are going to get a more proven or consistent track record. You know, the better a player you are, the more a proven track record of success you have, the more money you're going to be able to command. Even as a restricted free agent, you're going to be able to parlay early career success into a multi-year deal as opposed to a bridge deal and get real money on the board. And the Oilers are not that far away from needing to spend money on the goaltending position. And that's a conversation for another day as far as what Stuart Skinner's worth on the open market versus what he's worth to the Oilers, because there are really 3 ways to go about this when you're constructing your goalie room. You can spend on the premium veteran that you've either drafted, you know, a Shesterkin, a Saros, a Sorokin. You can go out and try and sign one in free agency, Freddie Anderson, Sergei Bobrovsky, towards the upper echelon of the market. You can get on the goalie carousel every year where you can get a crack at somebody like Cam Talbot. You can try and take on a tandem project where you look at a goalie who's been in a more equal timeshare, you know, close to 40 starts with the other goalie they play with, and say, we think if we stretch him out to 50, 55 starts, he's good enough to be a starter. We'll have to manage his workload. We'll have to manage his energy. And you do run the risk of burning a guy out, because some guys just aren't starters. And that's not necessarily a disqualifying trait. You know, if you have a good backup goalie, that's a good thing. You know, it's hard to justify spending a lot on a backup goalie because of how infrequently they play, the typical physical profiles, or maybe the age of the types of players you're going to get to be a backup. But for the most part, those are your 2 consistents. And then, you know, some teams, if you have a track record of developing goalies, in some organizations, you know, the Rangers, the Canucks, the Predators, to some degree, the Panthers, have good track records of developing their own goalies that they draft, that they let marinate, whether it's in the AHL or if it's in a European professional league. Those types of players are hard to come by. The goaltending position is defined by its scarcity. It's very similar to the way we talk about quarterback in football, where there are 32 teams in the NHL, and there are maybe 12 good goalies that you feel reasonably confident in. And then there's 5 that are consistently good year over year, because when you get past those first 5 or 6 guys, the volatility starts to increase. And the further down your list you go, the more volatility is associated with said position. And I don't think Stuart Skinner is anything remarkable, but I think he's functional. I think he can be slightly above average. And that's kind of the breaking point, if you will, the threshold for Stanley Cup success. Because as you can see by the Avalanche a couple of years ago with Darcy Kemper, with the Vegas Golden Knights with Adin Hill, if you are a consistently above average regular season goalie, and on occasion you can just be good on a great possession team, that's more than enough. When you don't need to steal every game, when you just need to make the saves you need to make, and if you play behind a good enough team, they're not going to ask you to do a whole lot. You know, Saturday night, Calvin Pickard faced 17 shots the whole game. He conceded 2 goals. Most nights, that's going to be enough. And that game was a little bit of a slog. It was hard to get some space. I understand that. But when the Oilers play as functional defense as they do when they're playing well, that's all Skinner and Pickard are going to need most nights is don't ask them to make 30 saves. Don't ask them to make a ton of high danger saves. 25 to 20 saves a night is something the Oilers are going to be able to work with. You know, the Oilers came out of the gate very slow, and part of that was the goaltending. You know, the special teams goaltending, especially on the penalty kill, was a disaster. And part of the reason why they came out of the gate so slow was their disastrous special teams. But when you go back to mid-November, you have a real track record of both goalies turning around their seasons. Pickard is 9-4-0 on the season. He's got 13 starts, and the ratio the Oilers have been going is 2 starts for Skinner, 1 start for Pickard. That ratio, for what Pickard is at his age, is workable. Stuart Skinner has started no more than 3 consecutive games. Whenever the Oilers have had extended time off, they've typically come out of the gate with Skinner as the starter because he is their starter. He is their 1A goalie, which means you want him to have the lion's share of the work. Pickard has started at least one of every back-to-back. The Oilers have yet to double dip on one of the back-to-backs, which that's a good sign because that shows me the Oilers have confidence in both of their goalies, and that's important. And lest we forget how crucial the Oilers going to Calvin Pickard in the conference finals last year was, because I don't think that entirely swung the vibe of that series, but it gave Stuart Skinner 2 games to reset his mind. And then when the Oilers came back to him, the Oilers were able to pull that series out. They were able to win game 6 and 7 with with Skinner in net, And that does matter, because if you don't have confidence in your backup goalie, there are a lot of coaches out there who would go down with the ship. There are a lot of goalies who would say, I started this guy 50-something games in the regular season. I got to ride it out. He got me here. I owe it to him. And this is one of the things I give Chris Knobloch a lot of credit for, is his knowledge of his guys and knowing what buttons to push. And since mid-November, Skinner has a .915 save percentage in his last 14 starts, which is really good. League average is about .910 in all situations. And then Pickard has a .904 save percentage in the same window. Now, the goal saved above expected for Pickard, he's about 4 goals saved under expected, which for a backup goalie is nothing to write home about, but it is workable because the Oilers aren't asking him to do a whole lot. And then Skinner, his goal saved above expected, it's going to take him a while to get to the positive side of things because his first 10 starts or so were just so egregiously bad. But he's trending in the right direction. He has played a lot better since mid-November, and it's not a coincidence that mirrors the entire team's turnaround. We're going to take one more break on today's show, and we'll talk about what all of these lineup opportunities mean for the team in the macro coming up next. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. Today's show is brought to you by Rocket Money. With all of the different subscription services and subscriptions we have today, it can be easy to lose track. And with Rocket Money, they helped me find a few subscriptions I didn't realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down, like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, the best feature is the goals feature. I've been able to set aside money for my future, so no more stressing about budgeting every month. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers as we're talking about the 4-2 win against the Kraken on Saturday. Not sure what we're going to tackle on tomorrow's show ahead of their game against the Bruins. There's a few topics rattling around in my head that I think are all interesting to varying degrees, but I'm going to do my best to make sure that episode is out Tuesday morning so it's with you on your way to work, on your way to school, while you're working out, or whatever. I like having lineup options. And when you're thinking about this Oilers team, you probably felt pretty solidified as far as what the lineup was going to look like most nights. And it has taken a little while, but I don't think you can argue that the Oilers are finding ways to be successful, even if it's a little bit unconventional. I don't think Kasperi Kapanen is in the Oilers' long-term plans, but they like what he brings. They like something about Kasperi Kapanen's game that keeps him in the lineup. And that is something I wasn't expecting for a waiver claim to be able to stick around. When they made that waiver claim, they were dealing with a multitude of injuries. They needed warm bodies just to fill out the lineup card. Now Kapanen is playing well enough and consistently well enough that the coaching staff wants to keep him in the lineup. And you think about what that does in terms of the trickle-down effect of that, where if you keep Kapanen in the lineup, that puts somebody else's lineup spot in question. And at times, it's been Jeff Skinner. At times, it's been Derek Ryan. And all of this is to say, and the big picture here, the Oilers having these options means they have opportunity. And you hear me talk a lot about the idea of reaching your ceiling and maximizing your opportunities, because you only get so many kicks at the can as a team. And when you have players who are fighting for lineup spots, and you have veterans, frankly, fighting for lineup spots at an early enough point in the season that there's still some questions as far as who's going to be on the roster come the playoffs. You have the lingering Evander Kane stuff of if he's going to come back, when he's going to come back. You, of course, could add a forward at the trade deadline as well, even though I think the Oilers have certainly circled the defensive group and maybe even a goaltender more than they would prioritize a forward. But all of this is to say, I am excited about the possibility of the Oilers fine-tuning this lineup even more, because, yes, Podkolzin has been great with Draisaitl. Hyman has a multi-year documented track record with McDavid, but what are we going to do with Nuge? What are we going to do with Adam Henrique? What are we going to do with Kapanen and Derek Ryan and Victor Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner? When you have this many guys all vying for lineup spots and giving you different skill sets and different possibilities, that means you can afford to tailor your lineup a little bit more to a given opponent. That's a little more common in the other sports, especially in baseball, where you'll see teams platoon guys when they have better splits, righty versus lefty. But if they're playing a team where they feel like they need a little more juice, you have the option to play Jeff Skinner a little more. If you're playing a team where you feel like you need a little more energy, you might need a little more forecheck, you have Kapanen. And I think really, for me, what I'm most curious to see is who ends up pulling away out of the Jeff Skinner, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Kasperi Kapanen, and you could throw Arvidsson in there as well, even though it seems like Arvidsson's going to stick with Draisaitl in the interim at least, because those are three guys with very, very, very different profiles. Nuge is an Oiler lifer, almost certainly will be an Oiler lifer, barring something completely unforeseen in the future. Jeff Skinner was a free agent brought in a not even a prove-it contract, in a mercenary contract. Both sides knew he wanted to sign a one-year deal, put up 25 to 30 goals, and then try and parlay that into a 3 or 4 year deal with another team come next summer. Kasperi Kapanen, a waiver claim off of a bad Blues team and looking for an opportunity to prove himself to stick in a lineup a little more consistently and to play up in a lineup a little more consistently, because as we always talk about, where you play in the lineup, it says a lot about what a team expects of you, because if you're playing with McDavid or with Draisaitl, there's an expectation you're going to help contribute to some offense. If you're playing on the third line or the fourth line, there's an expectation that you're going to try and bring the temperature of the game down a little bit. You're going to cycle, you're going to forecheck and try and milk some clock, that you're going to be a responsible 200-foot player. And I like the fact that the Oilers have some lineup questions, because it tells me they know they're not finished. And I'm weary of teams who feel like their lineup is finished too early in the season, because then, as I said in the outset in the first segment, if you start to get complacent with your spot, it gets very easy to go on autopilot. And the Oilers have had to face some adversity early, which does help and has made them a little hungrier, a little more desperate. And having guys like Podkolzin and Kapanen, and some of the guys on defense, frankly, Kulak, Stetcher, Emberson, who are hungry for opportunities to play more, having all of those guys kind of seize their moments, their opportunities to prove themselves, that tells me you have a good environment, because it tells me guys feel like they have an opportunity to be rewarded. And that's one of the biggest keys to me in running a good room, is that you have a linear and direct and open path to more playing time if you play better, regardless of your contract, your status as a player. If you're a first-year guy, a 10th-year guy, if you play better, you get more opportunities. And Podkolzin is a great case of that. And I do think Jeff Skinner, and I said this on the episode I did about Jeff Skinner last week or maybe the week before, that he was being unfairly held accountable for a slow start that the entire team endured. I don't think his play in the first 10, 15 games with Draisaitl or with McDavid was bad. I just don't think they were scoring enough. And when the team wasn't scoring as a whole, the most obvious solution was do whatever you can to get McDavid going and hope everything else would catch on, kind of the push to start for the entire team. And it ultimately worked out. But I still think one of the keys to getting this team optimized is finding a way to maximize Jeff Skinner, because I just don't think you're going to be able to get anything for him of value to a team that's trying to compete right now. Sure, you get a draft pick, but you don't want a draft pick if you're the Oilers. You want a middle six forward who's got some offensive flair to his game, who can skate well and can shoot. And Skinner is all of those things. It's simply a matter of, can the Oilers find a position to put him in to succeed? That'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, perchance, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the alarm bell, get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow ahead of the game against the Bruins. I'll see you guys then.